or no? So Charlotte, is it opposite weather there?
Yeah, it's cold. It's really
Opposite
cold.
to us.
I'm assuming so. Yeah, you guys are warming up, aren't you? Getting ready for summer?
Yes.
Yeah.
So you're
So where are you guys exactly? You're in Ashland and
Chelmsford.
Chelmsford. Are they both in the same area or?
Massachusetts, like right outside of Boston.
Yeah, Greater Boston area, we call it, I think.
Okay.
Ashland's a little closer, but
Yeah, okay. Does it get quite hot there? I know it gets really cold, doesn't it?
Yeah, it depends on the climate change issues.
Yeah.
It's been dry but it does, summer gets pretty hot, but we have the beaches, so it's okay.
Yeah.
coastal.
Yeah, no, it feels like a very cold winter coming here. Sydney's kind of funny. Melbourne, you get really cold winters, and Sydney, you get freezing cold mornings and nights, and then you sort of have really hot afternoons. So you never know what to wear.
Dress in layers, yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty much where we all are at.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. As people are coming in, we'll get started in just another minute or so. We are here with Charlotte McConaghy and Meena Jain, and we're going to start the conversation in just a moment. I will start with just a quick introduction as people are coming into the room. Let's see. So this is our annual One Book Chelmsford author event. One Book Chelmsford is a community-wide reading program encouraging all residents to read a selected title and attend programming related to the book. The title is selected each fall, and the library provides free copies to share. Related programs typically start in the early calendar year. The library has been offering this program since 2007. For our 17th year, we chose the epic and galvanizing novel Migrations by tonight's guest, Charlotte McConaghy. Migrations is a haunting story set in the near future in a world on the brink of catastrophe as a young woman chases the world's last birds and her own final chance for redemption. Charlotte is an Australian author living in Sydney with her partner and son. Migrations is her first foray into adult literary fiction, published in North America by Flatiron Books and by Penguin Random House in Australia and the UK. It has been translated into over 20 languages and adapted to film. It is being translated into 20 languages and adapted to film. Many thanks go out to the representatives from Flatiron Books and Penguin Random House that made today's event possible, especially Amelia Pazanza for fielding all of our questions and plans. Thank you also to the Friends of the Chelmsford Library for giving away hundreds of copies of Migrations to the community and for working so hard to make our programs possible, and to the community of Chelmsford for avidly supporting this program year after year. Tonight, our guest, Charlotte McConaghy, will be in conversation with Meena Jain, director of the Ashland Public Library, who is a passionate advocate for the fun of reading and library programming that connects people around common interests. She loves chatting with authors and creators and is thrilled with this opportunity. With that, I will turn it over to Meena and Charlotte. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Jessica, for having me. And I'm excited, like I said, as you said, to speak with Charlotte. I have a really quick question for you, Jessica. How did you, as a community, choose Migrations as your one read this year?
Well, this year we actually took it upon ourselves to say, yes, we want Migrations, because we feel like climate change is such an important issue to our community and to communities across the US and across the world. Our former director was a huge fan of this book, and it meant a lot to her. And this was one of the ones that we've talked about for One Books in previous years as well. And so this year we just are so happy that we finally made it happen and people have just loved it. So
Yeah, you said you gave away those books in a blink, so that was great.
yeah.
Thank you, Jessica. Charlotte, I'm so pleased to be here with you, and I'm so pleased that your book was chosen for this. But let's get right into it. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Did you always want to be an author, or I know you were a screenwriter, was that your first passion?
Well, firstly, thank you guys so much for having me. This is just wonderful. I'm blown away by the support that you guys have shown for this book. Yeah, I have wanted to be a writer for as long as I can remember. I started writing my first novel when I was 14, and I finished it when I was 17, and that kind of weirdly ended up getting published and starting my kind of first journey into big epic fantasy fiction for kids. So that was kind of where I first started writing, and I think I was about mid-20s when I decided I needed to kind of skill myself up a bit, learn the craft of storytelling. So I went and actually did a screenwriting degree. I did 2 degrees. Screenwriting is amazing for story craft, and it was surprisingly helpful for my prose. So, and it also kind of got me thinking about what meant something to me, and what was important for me to start writing about, to challenge myself to kind of move in a slightly different direction. And it's not that I don't love fantasy anymore, it's still great fun, but I suppose I didn't want to write as much for escapism as I did for kind of looking at the world and what's happening to it, and kind of embracing my fears and sadnesses and hopes around all of that. And that's when I moved into starting to think about migrations, and the screenwriting's kind of been running alongside it. I would say I'm definitely a novelist first. I have my degrees in screenwriting, and I've worked in film and TV development for a while, but I'm definitely a novelist first.
Well, we're very glad because we love your novels. So since Migrations is Chelm's third one read, let's dive into that a little bit. And also your first book for adults. Yeah. What gave you the idea for this specific book?
So the Migrations was a tricky one to kind of nail down, because it came to me over a lot of time and in a lot of different pieces. But I know that the first germs started when I was traveling around. As a lot of us do, I took myself off in my 20s to explore my sort of cultural heritage and my roots, and I was traveling around the UK, and firstly kind of thinking about I guess exploring where you belong, where I belonged, trying to find that sort of place. And so a character who felt very lost kind of came to me, or someone that wasn't sure where she belonged or where her home was, and was sort of forever searching for that home. And that's sort of how Franny first came to me. And I was also very, very aware of, for the first time, the birds all around me. I sort of was noticing these incredible, beautiful birds everywhere I went. And a lot of them were kind of long haul migratory birds. Many of them weren't, but I kind of couldn't help imagining where they were going and where they'd come from, and that journey, that sort of incredible adventure that they were going on. And I wished that I could kind of follow them. And so that's how those two ideas started to kind of marry up together. And I had this idea for a sort of lost, wandering woman who was very wild and untethered to a kind of human life, almost, in a way. She's migratory like the birds are. And that idea that she wanted to follow the last migration of the Arctic terns.
Which is kind of an interesting concept, because Franny has sort of this wanderlust. She's never really settled, whereas migratory birds go back and forth, right? Like that's what they do. It's very like predictable. So how did you put those two concepts together to make this incredibly complex story?
Well, I think she, yeah, I think she feels an envy for the purpose of the birds. I think she uses them as inspiration for her to find her own purpose, because they do have this kind of amazing destination in mind. It's sort of, this journey for her is the first time that she has a purpose to her wanderings, and that's why she's able to kind of, I guess, commit to it in a way that she often in the past hasn't committed to a lot of things. And I think she takes a lot of courage from their courage, and kind of, if they can do this impossible journey, which we're making harder, climate change is making harder every year, then she can too. Yeah, does that answer that, do you think? Or
yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense that once she had a purpose, she was able to actually complete a mission.
Yeah, and I think like we talk a lot about hope in terms of this book. It comes up a lot. We were sort of chatting a lot about hope when the book was first coming out, and I've kind of thought about that a lot since then. And I think originally I thought this was a novel about rediscovering hope. For Franny, she's lost that hope, and she has to kind of, the birds have to show it to her again. But in a way, I sort of feel like it's actually a book about rediscovering purpose. Hope, I think, it's important, but it's also, hope can be empty. We can hope that other people will save this planet for us. It doesn't necessarily compel us to act. Whereas finding a purpose, I think, does. And so there's something kind of integral about that. And for Franny, that's very much what it is. She's, for the first time in her life, she's rediscovering a purpose, or discovering a purpose.
So going back to something you said a minute ago, and we are starting to get some attendee questions, and I will get to them. You said that you were in your 20s when you started really thinking about this book. But again, I'm going back to that complexity of Franny's, like her history and her trauma, and how she moves towards resolving or not resolving a lot of that. How in your 20s, like what kind of research did you do to really dive deep into her psyche?
Well, at the time I was kind of doing, I was looking into things like the sleepwalking that she does. I was doing research about that and how that can kind of impact us. And, to be honest, her character was not something that I ever did a lot of research into. I had to feel her, I had to really, I did an immense amount of research for a lot of the other elements of this novel. Species loss, birds, climate change, migration, fishing vessels, the list goes on. But for Franny, she was my guiding sort of principle through the whole thing. I had to really deep dive down into her and sort of let her lead me instinctively through the rest of it. So a lot of what came out for her was just me feeling around in the dark for lights that could guide me along. I think she's a lot of the things that I wish I was. So I let wish fulfillment kind of be part of that. She's very wild. She's very in touch with, I guess, her instinctive animal nature. In a way that I think would benefit all of us to be more so. But she's also a lot of things that I do not want to be. She's very damaged and broken by that past, by the losses that she's felt. And I wanted those losses to feel incredibly intimate and visceral, to allow I suppose I wanted the personal loss to reflect the kind of larger global loss of the species and our planet. I wanted that personal kind of avenue in to feeling the kind of broader loss, which is very difficult for us to tap into a lot of the time. We protect ourselves from it. And I think that letting a character guide us into that is one of the ways that we can kind of allow ourselves to feel those things.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, I think it was super successful because she resonated with so many people for so many different reasons, you know, whether it was how we want to be, or how the things that we've had to deal with. So bravo on that. And did you outline the story, or did you just write it from Franny's perspective?
I plunged into it and sort of started writing. I always have a sense of where I want to go. And because I think this novel was a physical journey as much as it was an emotional and existential journey. That sort of in itself gives you a structure, because you know where you need to get to in the end. But I wanted to allow her to find her way through it. You know, a lot of writers talk about letting their characters lead them, and it's a strange thing that this sort of creature that we make up can kind of become their own guiding bosses.
Mm-hmm.
But it was that way for me a lot of the time. I wanted to let her kind of be the leader of that. But I actually reached a point about halfway through the book where it wasn't working. It was so flat. I couldn't kind of keep going. I couldn't identify what the problem was. I sort of started, you know, you doubt everything. You think this is boring. Nobody's ever going to want to read this. And so I took a step back. That was the first time that I started to think about the fact that I was writing a character who was deeply connected to the natural world, but I wasn't looking at our impact on the natural world. And I don't think you can write about nature and animals and without also writing about what we're doing to them. Mm-hmm. So that's where the idea for setting this novel slightly in the future came from. I didn't start with that. I started just with Franny and the birds. And then I realized that actually I needed to kind of, I needed a much bigger whole world thematic that could kind of underpin and bring, you know, far more meaning to her journey. And that was realizing that it was going to be during the peak of the extinction problem, where all the animals are either dead or very, very close to it. Mm-hmm. So that really kind of turned the whole book around for me. It brought it to life again. I went back, I rewrote it. Everything kind of made sense. Her journey made more sense when it was kind of under this lens. It just kind of really came into focus for me.
Mm-hmm. I think for us too, as a reader, it just seems so urgent for so many reasons, because it was just a little bit in the future.
Yeah.
So somebody asks, how long do you spend researching in the field as part of the writing process? Because specifically wondering if you traveled to the locations that you write about.
So I went to most of them. I didn't go to Antarctica, which, oh God, I would give anything to go there. But it's just, you know, I was in my 20s. I didn't have millions of dollars to get on a boat to go to Antarctica. And also since then, I've kind of wondered if it's, I don't know, I don't like the idea that we're traveling as tourists there. And so it's so untouched. But anyway, yes, I spent time in a lot of the places that the book was set to really get a feel for those places. And I mean, a lot of reading and just trying to kind of find a way to, the hardest thing was actually the boat, because I've never spent time on a boat. I haven't kind of worked on a fishing vessel. So that for me really kept stalling me. I didn't know what all the details were, and I had to just keep doing more and more and more research. My dad spent time on one, so I used him. I tried to kind of, I spent a few nights on a couple of them. I get terrible seasickness. But yeah, there's a sort of a point, I think, in a book where you have to stop researching because you can just get completely bogged down in it. It takes over everything, and you start to realize how much you don't know, and it just feels really, you feel dwarfed by it. So I just had to kind of stop and go, all right, I've got to just start writing.
Which is interesting because Kelsey says that as someone who's considering writing, she feels intimidated by research because you can go down that rabbit hole. So how do you know when you just need to stop?
Or
how do you approach the research?
When it's not inspiring you, when it's confusing you, or distracting you, I think are the times when you need to stop and get back into your characters. I sometimes actually like to start writing first and then see where the holes in my knowledge are, and then that will kind of guide me to where to start looking and reading and exploring, because you can waste a lot of time researching things that you don't actually need.
So I'm going to go to this question about Franny. They said this person asked, in their book group, we talked a lot about whether Franny's a sympathetic narrator. A lot of us felt like ultimately her actions and choices made it very difficult to find ways to sympathize or understand her choices and actions. Did you expect readers would find her to be a sympathetic character? Yeah,
I did. I love her, which I think is important. It's actually fascinating to me that this became such a kind of point of contention. I think it really kind of gets people, some of the stuff that it's a thing that sort of gets on people's nerves when people can't commit and they sort of can't stay, and but I find her very honest in that. I find her kind. I think she's brave. I think she, her sort of punishment of herself seemed like punishment enough. I didn't need to also punish her. She loves very boldly and openly, and sort of hates herself for not being able to, I guess, be traditional in the sense of her commitments. But the thing is, she's very committed to her husband, and her wandering is never sort of leaving him. It's not ending the relationship. And I suppose that's kind of an interesting point of discussion. Is that something that she needs to be sort of condemned for? I don't know. I didn't think so. And I think Niall, her husband, understood her in a way that kind of was very beautiful. And I don't know. I don't find her unsympathetic. I find she's mysterious for sure, and she's probably really annoying in some parts and maybe that's because I'm teasing the information out, and we don't initially know why she's doing this and why she's kind of so flighty, but it does make more sense when you kind of reveal the traumas that she's been through and the losses and the grief that she's kind of trying to survive. But I also just like the idea that she's a wanderer by nature, and that's okay as well.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I feel like we connected with her as a character, whether we find her sympathetic or not, because there are aspects of things. So I want to go back to one of the things you said earlier, that you had written your first book when you were not even a teenager, and it was published. And so you were pretty young. So then how did you basically morph and find your voice in this very like haunting and tragic voice that we all are like, oh my God, that's so awesome.
Yeah, it was really hard. I remember trying to write migrations, and so I suppose I was changing form. For the first time, I was writing a first person narrative that was one character, which meant, so with my fantasy, I would sort of do big sprawling worlds with lots of characters and lots of kind of interceding plot lines. And so that transition was really hard. I found there was nowhere to hide with this one character. If I got stuck, I couldn't kind of jump to anyone else. I had to stay with her and find a way through with her. That was challenging. I was really frightened that, it wasn't going to work. It was boring. Like I said, I thought it was kind of, I think I was scared of the intimacy, but at the same time, I had been a very character-driven writer all along. So it wasn't, it didn't feel wrong to me. It just felt like pushing further into something that I was already kind of trying to do. I suppose with the real world setting also, it was, there isn't anywhere to hide. You've got to kind of, but that being said, this is a very kind of, this is an adventure story. So in that way, it was similar to what I'd kind of been doing. And I think it was just and I'd always kind of written characters in my fantasy that were sort of, racked by loss and trying to kind of cope with really confronting emotional dilemmas. So again, that was not, too far from what I was doing. It's just that this needed to have a focus on something that's real, that we're all going through. And that was the most kind of tragic, haunting thing that I'd ever come across, and it's happening to us all now. So yeah, it was a muddle through.
So do you think the concept of climate change is the vehicle to work through Franny's issues, or do you think Franny's issues are a vehicle to highlight the issues of climate change?
I mean, I think both. I think they have to work completely in tandem with each other, or the book doesn't work. They're sort of deeply linked, and you can't untangle them. And I think if you could untangle them, then the book would be poorer for it. And as I sort of explained earlier, without the sort of backdrop of climate change, it didn't work. Her journey didn't work. And I think it would be the other way around as well. You can't just write about climate change without a kind of core protagonist's journey to emotionally invest us. So I would say it's definitely, they're just too intertwined.
Absolutely. So Sana asks, what made you interested in climate change and wildlife to begin with?
Just a sort of, I just couldn't, I mean, look, I think I've kind of touched upon wanting to have Franny's wildness and connection with the natural world. And I've touched on how I couldn't sort of write about that without coming face to face with our impact on that. And I think that was just a moment for me that really changed the way I was thinking about the world, thinking about my place in the world and my impact on the world. And once I had sort of imagined a world without animals, I couldn't unsee it. It was so devastating to me and so tragic, just the thought of it, that I don't think I've ever kind of been the same since. I know that I haven't been able to write without having that in my mind. The next 2 books after Migrations are also about different elements of climate change, and Once There Were Wolves, which is the next book after this one, is all about rewilding. I don't know, I'm not sure why. It's just really connected with me, and I think it kind of goes to a really deep place of sadness for the things that we've already lost, and fear about being able to hold on to the things that we still have.
Mm-hmm. And maybe sort of a sense of not being in control of a lot of it.
Definitely. I think we all do feel really powerless a lot of the time. And so writing a book was sort of a way that I could try to engage with it, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds to me like in the chat and in the questions that people really loved both Migrations, and then went out and read Once There Were Wolves and loved that as well. And obviously noticed the connections between the two in terms of the nature and the climate and the characters. So Suna again asked, what was wondering if you thought there were similarities and differences between Franny and Inti from Once There Were Wolves.
Yes, yeah, sure. So yeah, I'm sure there are big similarities. What I sort of always came back to in terms of their differences was Franny, and the place where I wrote Migrations from was a place of sadness and loneliness, and I think that's kind of Franny. Whereas Inti from Once There Were Wolves is really driven by rage, and that's what I was. That's the place I was in as well. It was quite a different experience for me writing that one, because I was looking around at, it wasn't just a nameless sadness of loss of animals and what the world would be like. I was actually looking around at what we're doing. And it filled me with fury. It started with the slaughter of the wolves. So that's kind of where that idea came from. And I sort of had to look back over the history of humans and wolves, and it was just really awful, really, really upsetting to look at the kind of killing of this beautiful creature that is incredibly, actually surprisingly gentle. And at the same time, I was also seeing in Australia, we were having this sort of, it was almost like a reckoning with domestic violence and the women that were being murdered by their partners at the time. And it was just shocking. And, it was one a week, and it still is one a week. And so that was making me really angry as well. And so that kind of made its way into the book too, these kind of things that I was furious about. And I suppose if I were to try and pinpoint what this next one, it's just this crazy emotional journey that I have to grapple with. I think the next one is fear. I've had a baby since the last 2, and I'm really thinking about things differently. I'm looking at the world we're leaving him and what it's going to be like for him. And I know so many parents are looking at it in the same way. And so that's, I suppose, what's kind of, fueling this third book. I guess that's how I would differentiate between the characters. They're also sort of different in their day-to-day lives, very much so, but in terms of how I approached writing them, yeah.
That's really interesting, because Angelica was just asking that question about if you connect with your characters in a negative way, did they fuel your rage or your fear or your sense of loneliness or loss? as much as you put into them?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I think it's a kind of it's a hard space to be sort of floating around in. It's day-to-day heaviness, I suppose. But what the point of it though is that you're traveling to a place of beauty and joy and redemption, forgiveness, love beyond any of it. So you kind of have to go to the dark places with your characters. You've got to let them take you, knowing that it will be all the more meaningful and cathartic when you get to the other side of it. And that's what I hope anyway. And I experienced that with them.
So how do you pull yourself out of it to really like cleanse yourself of all of those emotions that were imbued in your characters? Or do you?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you do. You do, day to day, you've got to get through the day. And it's just family and friends and people and walking in nature and listening to music and reading good books. It's just all the normal things I think that we all do to kind of shake off our work day. It's hard coming in and out of it. It's actually exhausting trying to find a kind of emotional way back in and then back out and then back in. But there is something very fulfilling about that, about the writing, or else I don't think I'd be doing it. It's yeah, I'm not sure. I don't really have the answer to that. Hopefully I will figure it out.
Okay, you don't have to have an answer to it. It's a tough one, I think, because some of the things you were talking about, I used to be a social worker, and I know that there's this thing called secondary trauma. So like you're learning all of this stuff, and it can cause trauma as a writer and for us as a reader. And how do we get away from that?
Yeah. Do you know? Tell me.
I only read lighthearted books, so I don't even go there. but I think that there's a purpose and there's an importance to your books that are really that we really need. And people in the chat have been saying we really appreciate that you write about these things because they need to be spoken about in a way that's accessible to people so that it doesn't feel hopeless.
Yeah, that's really nice. Thank you. I need that sort of sense of import, or else it's too hard. So, I think that, that's really nice to hear.
Just a couple of very specific questions. Why did you do that to Finnegan? I'm joking, but also not, because it made me sob.
Oh, I know. As in the donkey I'm trying to think back to, that was a true story, actually. That happened to my dad. He is a farmer, and he was out one night trying to protect his flock from the foxes, and his beautiful donkey was also doing the same, and he didn't see it and shot and hit him, and it was so sad. Yeah, so I asked him if I could use it. Horrible writers pilfering everything from their lives, but that was a true story.
Wow. Sona says, I was wondering if Leah survived her head injury. I totally respect an author's secrets, though it was meant to be more open-ended and up to the reader to interpret.
Yeah. So cards on the table, she originally died. And then we talked in the edit. It was too much. It was too sad. There was too much sadness. So I kind of kept her alive, I guess I left it as a mystery, but in my mind and heart, she's still alive.
We'll take it. Kelsey is wondering if you're going to be writing about different environmental backdrops. She's from Arizona and thinks the Southwest would be a great and stunning background for your style of work. Yeah,
okay, good idea. Thank you. Thank you for the tip. I'll have to come and live there for a few months if I'm going to do that. My next book is actually set on Macquarie Island, which not many people have heard of, but it is down near Antarctica. So it's an extraordinary, wild, remote, in just an amazing place full of penguins and seals, and they flop up to you on the beach to say hi because they haven't learned to fear humans. So yeah, I'm always kind of interested in finding different beautiful wild places that I can research and go and spend time in.
That must have been hard during the pandemic to not be able to do that kind of research.
Yeah, it was. I was lucky that I did my research trip to Scotland, which is where Once There Were Wolves is set, just before the pandemic hit. So thankfully I'd been there several times before, but I needed to go back for specific research. And thankfully I was able to do that before everything went crazy. And then I didn't need to kind of do any more research over that sort of 2-year period where it was really bad because I was having a baby. And then since then I've been down to Macquarie Island once they started opening up their trips again.
That sounds really amazing. You're probably relatively close to it. Like, we're so far away, right?
I'm a lot closer than you are. Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah.
You can tell geography is not my forte.
Yeah.
So again, going back to migrations being your first adult book about adults, were you surprised by the reception of it? I mean, it's been called some amazing words. It's visceral and haunting. It's hopeful, true, and affecting, powerful, vibrant, unique, thrilling, tantalizing, suspenseful, atmospheric, aching and poignant, gripping and gorgeous. Those are from like some of the top, reviewers in the world. Were you surprised by this?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, I wasn't. You never write for the critics. It's not even close to sort of thinking about that when you're in the space. You think about readers and wanting to connect with them emotionally. That's a driver for me. And because it was as I sort of explained before, it was such a weird process writing that book of just trying to discover myself as a new writer and explore a kind of new space. I didn't dare to dream that it would be well received. I sort of couldn't even approach that. And I think originally when it got picked up for publication, it was so exciting and kind of crazy. And I think it was sort of, probably just a quiet little release had been planned for it. And then more and more people started reading it. And I think it picked up a bit of a momentum of its own in-house. And then booksellers started to kind of get excited about it. And just sort of, it just shifted its trajectory kind of in a really organic way, which was amazing. Kind of, it's a lot better than having a very buzzy book that flops. This was quite nice. I didn't have any expectations about it in this kind of journey that it took on. And then it was so lovely to kind of see people responding to it. Amazing.
Well, there's so much to connect to with it. And going back to being your first adult book, Suna asks, what your writing inspires her so much, and what kind of advice would you give to aspiring writers in terms of motivation, inspiration, things like that?
Oh God, this is what I'm really struggling with myself.
Oh no.
I'm kind of going through a bit of a metamorphosis at the moment because all my sort of many years of writing was just me alone with my books and characters, and now I'm sort of completely pulled in another direction. I have no idea how mothers find the creative space to, I mean, I've just written a book because, you know, you've got to keep going, but it was hard. It was really, really hard in a completely different way than the other books were. Yeah, it's like the stolen hours sort of put a real pressure on that time that you have to write, and it's much harder to drift down into the emotional state that you need. All I can say is try and put in the time. I know I never used to be a person who said that you've got to kind of have your bum in the seat. I was always a person that was led by inspiration and feeling inspired and feeling in the right mood, and that's all well and good when you've got the luxury of that. When you don't have the luxury of that, when you've got time pressures, you have to sit down and get something out, because then at least you've got something you can work with. And I would say also, don't discount the need for input. I think input's crucial for output. So I need to be doing a lot of reading before I can write. I need to watch really good stuff. I need to listen to really good music. It doesn't just come from nowhere.
Wait. What would that look like? Really reading, watching, listening to really good stuff. What is that for you?
Oh my God, I don't know. Like specific things?
Yeah, like what are you listening to? What's on your playlist right now?
Oh God. Well, I really like listening to movie soundtracks, like movie scores when I write, because they're so dramatic. Like they're meant to be dramatic. They're meant to conjure emotion. So, and that's what they do when you write. And a lot of like period piece type stuff have beautiful orchestral scores that are just like perfect, because they don't distract you, but they sink you into that kind of amazing emotional space. And as to what, you know, I mean, I think everyone has their own stuff that they love and to read and write. And I would say read things that are slightly challenging rather than, unless, you know, it just totally depends what you want to write. Read the stuff that you want to write.
And are you a pretty avid reader?
I try to be. I'm less so now that I have so much less time and less energy, but I still try and read a bit before I go to sleep every day. And then, you know, if I have time in the work day where I'm not feeling inspired, I'll step back and I'll pick up a book, which it's part of work for me.
Do you read the similar genres of what you write?
When I'm writing, yes, I have to, because it really affects my prose, actually. Like if I start reading something that's completely different, my writing will morph into that, and then it will be weird and bad. So if I read sort of things that I would aim to be as good as, that will help me to you know, it's like when you're playing tennis, you need a really good partner to step up your own game. And if you're playing with someone terrible, you'll wind up playing terribly as well. So that's kind of reading for me.
That's interesting, because I've talked to a bunch of authors and they've always said, I don't read what I write because I'm afraid of accidentally taking their ideas or their words.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it's fascinating to me that you have a different process, or not from every writer out there, but just a few that I've spoken to.
Well, I wouldn't say that there's anything. I mean, this is going to sound kind of insane, but like, I don't find a lot that are so the same as my work that it would have that kind of effect. I think, you know, I just try to aim for really good literary fiction.
Oh, okay. So can you just talk a little bit more about the book that's coming out and when that's going to happen?
Yeah, so I'm not really sure yet when it will come out, but because I'm editing it at the moment, it's probably likely to not be until 2025, sadly, which feels so far away at the moment. But you know, just due to scheduling That's the most likely when it will be, hopefully early 2025.
Well, I mean, it's better than George R.R. Martin.
Oh, when's his schedule?
His are like 10 years apart. His books are like,
yeah.
so we're okay.
And it's just the story of, it's a story of a family, a father and his 3 children, who are the caretakers of a lighthouse on this very remote island. And the island is being steadily swallowed by the sea. And a woman washes up on shore, and they don't know who she is or why she's there, but she has mysterious intent. And there's a sort of, it's a Gothic romance mystery, I would say.
I am here for that.
Okay, good. And it's all about sort of how we find the courage to love when we know that people and places may be gone soon because of the state of the world, and how we raise children in a world like that.
Wow. Oh my gosh, I can't wait for 2025. So I want to move it a little bit into the fact that Migrations has been optioned for a film. I know that that must be super exciting. I have to ask, are you going to write the screenplay for it?
No, I'm not. I sold that one to Sunny March, their production company in the UK. It's Benedict Cumberbatch's production company. And I just kind of gave it over. That one is, sometimes I think some projects are really kind of great to be adapted by the author, and then I think some projects need a bit of separation. I probably would have loved to do it, to be honest, but it would have been very challenging. When I start to think about, particularly going into a film is hard because you're cutting rather than adding, which you do for a TV show. And adding can be really fun, but cutting's heartbreaking. So it's probably best that they've got a director and a writer on board, and she's probably paused now because of the strike, but hopefully they'll get back into it soon. It'd be so great to see it as a film.
It's interesting that you say that about the cutting and the adding, because as a reader and a watcher, we also notice that, like when we read a book and they don't have that pivotal scene in it from, and it's so disturbing and annoying.
It is. There's always a reason. They never just do it willy-nilly. And I will say that from my experience of adaptation, it comes from solving problems. It comes from, if there's a scene that's not in it, it didn't work. They had to get rid of it. So I know it's very frustrating and annoying, but often they probably angsted over it themselves.
I'm gonna have to take your word for that, because it just makes me mad.
It's so hard adapting books. Oh my God.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so Amy asked, because we're talking about screenplay writing, she said that, can you expand on how you said that screenwriting helped your prose? Because it seems like that's backwards. The screenwriting seems like it would have the opposite effect, since you need to be a little bit more concise. Why would?
Well, it's originally, so first it helped with things like understanding story structure, understanding genre, understanding a character arc and transformation, understanding how to use kind of turning points to challenge the character. So all of that stuff will strengthen a book immensely. Understanding how to kind of have your character reflect the theme that you're trying to explore. That's all stuff that before you think about writing craft, you sort of don't. Well, I never thought about any of that. I don't know. I was just kind of completely writing on instinct. And once you start learning that story craft, it can be a bit of a burden, because you sort of worry about it constantly, but it's very, very helpful. And in terms of on a sentence level, Screenwriting is really great for brevity, which is very important in prose writing as well. I think we not everyone, but I have a tendency to overwrite. And it was really good for me to just kind of pull back, think about what we're seeing visually, think about the action in a scene, think about how to say things in as few words as possible, but make those words powerful. That's a good muscle to think about when you're writing with prose as well. Do I need all these extra sentences? Do I need all these extra words in this sentence? No, I don't. It will be much stronger if I just simplify and cut back. So in that way, yeah, very, very, very helpful. And I mean, they're different beasts, of course. Like in a book, you've got to kind of go into the mind of a character, and you can't do that in a screenplay. All you've got is action and dialogue. So there's a luxury to prose writing that you get to kind of explore feelings and thoughts. But yeah, like I said, it's a very good muscle to kind of think about what you actually need in there.
Which is interesting, because I thought your writing is very spare, which is very similar to concise. And one of our listeners is saying that it's also very lyrical, and wondered if you listen to your books or if you read what you're writing out loud to yourself so you can hear how it sounds.
I don't actually. I have had quite a few people ask me that. It's too embarrassing. I can't do it. Ugh. I can't even listen to the audiobooks, even though they're beautifully read by professional actors. It's sort of something about it's too, I don't know. It's like hearing your own voice being recorded. It's so cringy. So I don't, but maybe I should.
I think it might be a good experiment to try. You can always erase it. Yeah. We're almost out of time, but I do want to make sure I ask this question and maybe one more. So Charlotte, you said that your books, you want to sort of be hopeful. How do you personally feel about the climate, and are you hopeful about it? And would you recommend any books about climate to us?
Am I hopeful? Yeah, I am, but depends what day you catch me on. And I think it's also kind of, I feel a little bit the way I sort of touched on earlier about hope being sometimes empty versus purpose and action. Sometimes I just feel like even talking about hope is just kind of empty rhetoric. And I mean, look, if it energizes you, then great, that's amazing. But I suppose we just sort of can't let it make us complacent by thinking that, yeah, other people will solve the issue for us. So I am hopeful, but I also am aware that hope can be a bit of a trap, and I try not to let it make me lazy about the choices that I make. I think, unfortunately, if we're going to turn this ship around, it's going to take a lot of self-sacrifice. That's the thing we don't really want to hear. We do have to make some kind of daily changes to our lives, and that's hard, but sort of we don't have any choice anymore. That's it. So I think, yeah, I'm just trying to focus on being active and making my impact on this world a positive one rather than a negative one.
Fabulous.
Yeah, books about the climate. Oh gosh, like as in non-fiction books. Oh God, I've read so many. My library's all packed into a box.
That's okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
I have a very so everybody in the chat is very much with me about in it for your next book, which is great. And I have one really important final question for you is, are you going to get to meet Benedict Cumberbatch?
Probably not. I don't know. I seriously doubt it. But you know, maybe if we were doing like a big red carpet release screening, then I might get to meet him. That would be cool. Claire Foy, who is directed to star in it, I met her on Zoom, and that was really cool. I had a bit of a kind of fan moment. She's gorgeous and lovely. I also read though in I think it was a Vogue interview with her where she was talking about the project, and she was saying she hopes she's still allowed to be in it because she's getting older by the day. And so yeah, I hope she's still in it, but we'll see.
Yeah,
it's taken a long time to develop.
All right, so we'll look for pictures with you and Claire and Benedict on the red carpet. And we'll be like, yep, we asked. We asked the question. So I just have to say thank you so much. This has been so enlightening to me, and fascinating and funny and interesting. And I feel a sense of hope knowing that you're out in the world writing these books to make us really aware of what's happening around us.
Great. I'm glad. Thank you so much, Meena. It was a lovely chat.
Thank you so much, Charlotte and Meena. That was wonderful. The book is Migrations by Charlotte McConaghy, and we are getting so many accolades in the chat. You both did wonderful. Thank you. This was an amazing event.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. And thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Everyone. Thank you.
Good night.